I never realized how important the Salton Sea was until I saw this documentary. Welcome to the Film Threat Podcast. I am Chris Gore. I am pleased to have on the director of Miracle in the Desert, The Rise and Fall of the Salton Sea, Director Greg Bassenian. Greg, welcome to the Film Threat Podcast. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Chris. I appreciate it.
Cool. This documentary, clearly you have a passion for the subject. And I honestly, other than hearing the Salton Sea, hearing about it, never knew of the ecological impact that the Salton Sea had on the residents, its proximity to Coachella. I really was completely unaware of all of this. How did you become involved in this topic?
So I think around 2012, I was probably online at work or something. And I think I'd stumbled onto some sort of a video about the Salton Sea. I don't know, it was probably YouTube or something. And it was kind of interesting. I watched it and I saw these sort of relics out there. And that was the first time it sort of came into my consciousness to a certain extent. And I think a lot of people have had that experience. If you've lived in Southern California for a certain amount of time, you've heard of it. You've heard of the Salton Sea. Maybe you've heard that name, but you don't quite know what it is. So in 2014, 15, early 2015, one Saturday with a friend of mine, we just said, hey, why don't we don't have anything to do. Let's go check it out. And we drove out to Palm Springs area. And you know, it's a little bit past Palm Springs, it's like 45 minutes past Palm Springs. And I remember very vividly, we were heading towards it and I was looking on my map and it's this huge thing and we couldn't see it. And so I said, where is this thing? It looks massive. And we kept moving towards it. And then we still couldn't see it, even though we were supposedly on the edge of it, according to my map. And then all of a sudden we came around this bend and the palm trees kind of moved away. And out in front of us was this massive, massive body of water. And as someone who grew up in Southern California and thought I knew about, you know, the history, and I'm from Laguna Beach, I was kind of stunned and taken aback. And the rest of the day, we sort of drove around the shoreline, and it just is an eerie place. It has this feeling that something happened there, and now whatever it was has suddenly vanished, and you're just seeing the remnants of this kind of past society. So that was my introduction. That was my first experience. And, you know, I was not a director by trade. I work in entertainment, but I was working in writing as a writer. And for some reason, it just struck me that day, and I became interested in the subject matter and decided to sort of pursue it and see what I could find and what questions I could answer about the Salton Sea, basically.
Well, what are the common misconceptions? I mean, you mentioned that, you know, you went to try to visit and couldn't, and went on a map and tried to visit and had trouble even finding it. But what is it? And the documentary lays this out really well, but I really want to hear in your words, like, what are the common misconceptions, what people think about the Salton Sea, and then what are the challenges facing the residents that live in that region?
Yeah. So the big misconceptions typically that you hear are, oh, it's this kind of wasteland of a lake. It's highly polluted. It's dead. There's nothing in it. And the second thing is, all the people there are these, it's weird, it's crazy. And I think a part of that is it's gotten some bad press, which is talked about in the film. And there's been some films made about it. You know, there's a sort of a canon of work about the Salton Sea, and it's highlighted some of the people and the issues there. And maybe it makes it seem like a little bit of an odd place. And when I got there, I did feel that. I'm not going to lie. I did sort of feel that initially, but it's not really an odd place. It's actually quite beautiful. The water is not particularly dirty. I'd say after a storm, you know, Santa Monica here in Los Angeles is going to be very polluted. You don't want to swim in it, whereas the Salton Sea is pretty decent. And this attitude that it's a dead place is actually quite false. While a lot of the fish aren't there anymore, there's still fish there, and it used to be highly active as an ecosystem. So it's not this sort of odd, weird, dead place. It's actually very, very active. It's just that the visitors don't come back. And so there's this notion that it has been left behind and it's kind of this weird ghost town.
What led you to want to make the documentary? The thing that struck me the most were the residents there telling their stories, telling, talking about living so close to it and how it's just affected the community. What led to you wanting to say, well, I'm a writer, guess I'll become a doc filmmaker? It's not exactly like, it's like, you weren't like bitten by a radioactive Morgan Spurlock, right? Like that would be the origin.
Right.
That'd be the origin you might expect of a doc filmmaker. But,
sure.
but what was your journey in getting there?
The personal journey was really trying to scratch the itch in terms of finding out what happened. I think a lot of people that go out there and do physically see the Salton Sea, they sort of ask themselves, well, gee, what happened here? Where did the people go? Because you see all these relics and buildings and it's become pretty iconic and people go there as a tourist destination. So question number one for me was, why did people leave? Usually when there's a huge body of water somewhere, a lake like that, there's a ton of activity. There's fish, there's people fishing, there's people on the shoreline, there's boats on the water. And there wasn't a single person out there. And it's a 350 square mile lake. So that was the first thing I want to do. Let's answer that question. What happened? Why did the people leave? The second thing was, how did it get here in the first place? It's not really a natural place, it seemed to me, to have a huge body of water in the middle of the desert where it's 110, 115 degrees. So understanding the history of it and the origins of it, and those two things, as I started to sort of investigate them and started to actually embark on the filmmaking process physically, led me to what is now the ecological things that are happening out there in the valley that I was not aware of. And I think a lot of people in Southern California just aren't aware of in general.
Well, yeah, I was certainly not aware of it. I feel like you could do like another Coachella there. Maybe that would be something to, you could, right?
Yeah, you could do a festival on the water and raise money or do something. It's a pretty incredible place.
Yeah, I just, it was something that I knew of, but didn't know much about. And your documentary does an amazing job of informing, not just the history, but the current situation and the current challenges facing people that live by the Salton Sea. Let's talk about those challenges. We meet many of the residents and we get to know them personally and their struggles and sort of their perspective being in this place. Tell me about what are the current challenges facing people that live there?
So I think there's a few in particular. The number one challenge is raising awareness and giving them a voice. I think that was a big part of the film, obviously. That area of California, specifically the Imperial Valley, doesn't get a lot of representation up in Sacramento, near the state capitol. So they've had a hard time, raising that issue, bringing awareness about that issue. Simply due to the demographics of the area, there's a huge Hispanic population down there that unfortunately often gets forgotten about. And they don't have the resources to say, physically go to Sacramento and sit on those meetings or even do campaigning. So that's one big challenge for them. And that was a part of making the film, was to give those people a voice and hopefully this generates awareness for them. The second big issue that we sort of cover in the film is the size of the sea and the financial implications of what it takes to activate a solution. I don't want to give too much away because, obviously I want people to sort of experience it through the film, but there have been solutions that have been proposed both by locals and by the state government, but there always seems to be some sort of obstacle in the way, whether that's a financial crisis in 2009 or a financial crisis now, unfortunately. And there's a lot of bureaucracy. I think we cover a small project, with the locals in the area, and it's been 4 years just to kind of build a berm and fill some canals with water, and it's still not done. They still haven't gotten through all the red tape. So it's a combination of sort of these financial issues and the bureaucracy, along with the fact that, most people don't know that the Salton Sea is there, really. They don't know much about the Imperial Valley, and those people don't have much of a voice in general.
Has anything changed since the documentary came out? I feel like it really lays out all the problems and challenges currently facing people that are there. But has anything changed since the documentary has come out? Just obviously, the documentary must have helped with awareness.
Well, I think it has definitely helped with awareness, even in the beginning where it was going through some smaller festivals and festivals in the area. There were people 30 miles away from the Salton Sea that were unaware. So that definitely helped. I mean, I heard third-party accounts of people watching the film, and suddenly people were talking about it. So that's a great thing. As far as the changes around the sea in terms of solutions, things at the Salton Sea, unfortunately, tend to move very, very slowly. They have a plan, or a so-called plan that's covered in the film. Unfortunately, for some reason, the money doesn't seem to flow, and there was a big project on the south end of the sea. And to give you perspective, I started shooting many, many years ago, right? It's probably 2015, 2016. That project started on about 2016, 2017. If you go back now, there's been relatively little meaningful progress. And that's a project to cover up some of the exposed lake bed down there. And I've been going back there for 5 years, and I would see some, pipes that they had laid out, or I had seen maybe a little bit of groundwork that had been done. But then I was hearing about, they don't have money. They have to hire volunteers in the community to do this work. And I've heard that Gavin Newsom in January or February appropriated more money, but now we have COVID. So the saga sort of continues, unfortunately, and no large-scale action has really taken place. In October of last year, Imperial County did announce a state of emergency in terms of the air quality in the area. So that was one sort of piece of press that came out, and one piece of action that came out to, I think, light a fire a little bit, and things were moving a little bit. And then again, unfortunately, we've had the pandemic occur, which has not only kind of stalled those things, but that area already has respiratory issues. And as we know, COVID, exacerbates existing respiratory issues. So, I wish things would move more quickly. I don't think anything substantial has happened, but I do think awareness has been raised to a certain extent with the film, which is a good thing.
Absolutely. You just did an amazing job with it. And I know that I really like to pay tribute to documentary filmmakers here on the podcast, because it's not like your butler has time to help you with your doc, because doc filmmakers don't have money.
Right.
It really is. You don't have a butler.
No, but I understand. I mean, funding was an issue. Funding was an issue.
Right.
We did a Kickstarter campaign to raise money. So it really, what I can say is, along the way, when there were challenges with the actual filmmaking, whether it was raising money or access, there were little moments that sort of the universe provided to allow us to move forward. So that was, I don't like to be too superstitious, but there were some signals there that it was a story that wanted to be told, that needed to be told. And even from the get-go, some coincidental things happened where I said, okay, this is a story that feels like somebody wants to help me and wants to help me tell it. So let's continue. And it takes a long time, but ultimately it's worthwhile, and if it's helping raise awareness for it, again, that's the big cause here, is to give those people a voice.
Well, Greg Bassenian, thank you so much for being on the Film Threat podcast to talk about your movie, Miracle in the Desert, The Rise and Fall of the Salton Sea, it's currently available on VOD, just to confirm that.
Correct. It'll be on iTunes and other platforms.
Fantastic. Thanks for talking to us on the Film Threat podcast. I also want to thank our sponsor, Storyblocks. If you're a filmmaker, a documentary filmmaker, a filmmaker of any type, storyblocks.com/film threat. Go there. You'll get a special deal, and it's all sorts of tools to make documentary, to make for special effects, all sorts of filmmaker tools. So, Greg, you might want to go there.
Chris, not only do I know it well, but there's plenty of stock footage in my documentary that's from VideoBlocks.
Oh, really? That's
yes.
VideoBlocks and Storyblocks. Okay, that's great.
Yes. I was on the phone with them like 3 weeks ago. So,
oh my God.
Thank you, VideoBlocks. It was a huge part of the documentary and getting some of the pieces put together. So I'm a huge supporter.
Well, I'm just as like a, with I do some filmmaking projects on the side,
Sure.
and they have saved my butt so many times with having stuff that makes it look like you've got something that's huge, but you're really a low budget production. So yeah, I like to thank them every episode, and occasionally we'll get in a conversation, but I really appreciate it. Greg, thanks so much for being on the Film Trap podcast.
No problem. Chris, thank you again.